In this video, I want to explain how to multiply and divide with negative numbers. And I want to start by saying that multiplication and division with negative numbers is very easy. I would say subjectively easier than addition and subtraction with negative numbers. And I say this because if you already know multiplication and division, then you should have no problem with this. So we will start with multiplication, and I'm going to write down some rules. So we already know that, we already know that a positive number times a positive number is going to give us another positive number. And notice here that I didn't write multiplication here because when two numbers have parentheses and are side by side, there's an implied multiplication going on between the numbers. But what we don't know is that a positive number times a negative number will always give us a negative result. And you can write this either way because of the commutative property of multiplication. So we could write the negative first and then the positive. But either way, this is still going to give us a negative number. And then one last rule is a negative number times a negative number will give us a positive number. So a way to look at this is if the numbers that are being multiplied all have the same sign, then it is going to end in a positive result. But if the numbers have different signs, then the product will be negative. So you remember these rules, and this is all you need to know when multiplying negative numbers. So let's work on a few examples. We'll do we will say negative 6 times, and this dot here also means multiplication, negative 6 times 5. Well, we already know that 6 times 5 is 30, but remember our rule that said if we have a negative times a positive, this is going to give us a negative. So this is our answer to this problem. Negative 6 times 5 will be negative 30. Negative 30. And let's have negative 7 times negative 8. Well, we know 7 times 8 is 56, but let's think about our rule here. So we have a negative number being multiplied to a negative number, and a negative times a negative, well, they both have the same sign. And our rule says if two numbers have the same sign and they're being multiplied, then the end product is going to be positive. So this is just going to be positive 56. Positive 56. And I also want you to realize something. So any number we have, for any number that we have, we will call it n. If you multiply n by negative 1, it is just going to give you the opposite of n. This is because, well, let's think. What happens when you multiply by 1? That's just going to give you the regular number n. But when you multiply by a negative 1, what this is essentially going to do is switch the signs. So we could have some positive number 5 and multiply by negative 1. 5 times 1 is positive 5, but since we have a negative times a positive, this is going to give us a negative number. Or we could have negative 5 and multiply by negative 1. Well, when we have two numbers that are negative being multiplied together, this is going to give us a positive. So notice, anytime you multiply a number by negative 1, this is going to result in the opposite number. And this is true for anything. So we could have, 500 times negative 1. And I'll do that. 500 times negative 1 is negative 500. Or negative 68 times negative 1 will give us positive 68. Let's do one more thing before we talk about division with negative numbers. Now we are going to talk about exponents. Exponents of negative numbers. So let's take negative 2 to the 4th power, and then we'll take negative 2 to the 5th power. So this is going to be the same thing as negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. Well, this is just going to be 4 times 4. Since we see here we have positive and positive, we have negative and negative, so this is going to end up as a positive 4, and the same thing over here, which this will just be positive 16. And now we will take negative 2 to the 5th power, so there will just be one extra negative 2. So this is going to break down, and I'll actually write this down here. I'll write this down here. This will be positive 4, and then positive 4, and then we still have this negative 2. So this negative 2 over here. So this is going to end up as 16 times negative 2, and then this will be, well, since we have one positive and one negative, our end product is going to be negative, and 16 times positive 2 would be 32. So we know the answer here is negative 32. Negative 32. So there's a pattern here that you'll notice when dealing with exponents of negative numbers. Say we have the general case m, we'll say n or negative n raised to the m if m is even, then negative n to the m is positive. Is positive. And we know this is true because we saw in this example up here, if we have an even number of negative numbers being multiplied, all of these we can just break down into groups of 2. And since they're groups of 2 and they're both negative, then all of the numbers that we break down will be positive. Here we broke down positive 4 and positive 4. And this could be true for 2 to the, or sorry, negative 2 to the 22nd power. We could break the number down into 11 different groups of negative 2, and they would all be positive. Right? They would all be positive. And then if m is odd, then negative n to the m power is negative. Negative. And we also know this is true because similar to the number to a positive or to an even exponent, we could break them down into groups of 2, except now we're going to have one left over. We're going to have one leftover number. So since all of them will be positive and one will be negative, the end result will always be negative. And we can do examples of this. We will say negative 3 to the 4th power. We can break this down into negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. And we can break them down into groups of 2, just like I said, and this will be positive 9 and positive 9, and this will this will leave us with positive 81. And then we can do this over here. We will say negative 3, or let's do negative 4 to the 3rd power. Well, we'll rewrite this. Let me draw a straighter line here. This will be negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. We can only break these down into groups of 2, and then there will be one left over. So this will be positive 16 since they're numbers of the same sign. And then there will be a 1 left over, negative 4. So our answer here will be negative 64. And now let's move on to division. But before we move on to division, I want to remind you that we can write any number, we can rewrite any division problem n divided by m just as n over 1 times 1 over m. So the rules for division are essentially the same as multiplication, and I'll write them here. So we will have a positive number being divided by a negative number, or let's do positive number first since we already know what this will be. A positive number divided by a positive number will always result in a positive number. And then the rules are basically the same as multiplication. We will have a positive number divided by a negative number. This will give us a negative result, or a negative quotient rather this time. And this, we will have negative divided by a positive. This will give us a negative. And then we have a negative number being divided by a negative number. This will result in a positive number. And we can do some examples so that you can see this. So we will have 63 divided by negative 7. Well, 63 divided by a positive 7 would give us 9. But since we have a negative here, since we have a negative sign there, this will be negative 9. So now we can do 125 divided by, let's do negative 125 divided by 4. Well, we can just do this normally like we would if they were positive numbers. So we will have 4 into 125. 4 goes into 1 0 times. 4 goes into 12 3 times. 4 goes into 12 3 times. So we will now subtract. 12. That would be 0. Drop down this 5. 4 goes into 5 1 time. And now we will add decimals. Let's see, subtract 4 here. That will give us 1. We'll add a 0 here and then drop it down. Notice 4 goes into 10 twice. We will subtract 8. And then this will leave us with a 2. Add another 0 here. And this will give us 20, and then 4 goes into 25 times. So our answer, if they were both positive, would be 31.25. But notice we have numbers with different signs since this will be a positive 4. So our answer here will be negative 31.25. negative 31.25. And now I'm going to point out something similar to multiplication. So anytime we have a number n, if we divide it by -1, this will result in -n. Since n divided by 1 will just be itself, and then this -1 here will essentially flip the signs, and we can see this just like last time. 5 divided by -1, well, 5 divided by 1 is itself, and then we have a negative sign here, and this is a positive sign, so our result will be negative, so this is -5. And then we will have -5 divided by -1. Well, 5 divided by 1, if they're both positive, would be +5. And notice here they're both the same sign. They're both negative, so our answer will be positive, and we are done.